The holidays are coming. And with that, so are the invitations. And that little ping from your phone, a new email, another text. It might be about that family gathering you're already dreading at your in-laws, the one where you feel like you have to put on a performance. Or it might be about the office party where you feel obligated to attend, knowing that the noise and the small talk is going to leave you totally fried. It might be about your friend's quote unquote quick get together that you know is going to totally deplete your social battery for over a week. And you find yourself staring at your calendar, which quote unquote should be filled with joy at this time of year, but instead it looks like a minefield of obligations. And so you start typing out your replies, and yes comes out automatically. Yes, I'll be there. Yes, I can bring something. Yes, I can help set up. Yes, yes, yes. And with every single yes, you also feel that knot tightening in your stomach, because the thought of letting someone down, of someone being upset with you, it feels infinitely worse than the burnout you know is probably waiting for you on the other side of all these yeses. If this sounds familiar, if this annual tradition of overcommitting and pre-dreading the holidays is your reality, please hear me. You are in the right place. You're not alone. This cycle is not some personal failing or character flaw. It's not you being quote unquote too sensitive or bad at managing your time. This is a response that so many of us with ADHD have had to adopt, especially when we were younger, to get approval, to find acceptance, to experience any sense of belonging when we otherwise didn't naturally just fit in. So with that in mind, over the next two episodes 329 and 330 of the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast, we are exploring both why this happens in terms of people pleasing, as well as a practical, no-nonsense survival guide to help you get through the holidays with your sanity and energy and sense of self intact. You ready? Let's dive in. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm thrilled you're here today. If you are listening to this episode in real time, it is coming out mid-November, which means, as I mentioned last week, the holidays are coming. And while we tend to focus more specifically on topics of time management and productivity and honoring our capacity and navigating burnout, right? Those are the topics we usually talk about on this podcast. I also know, because I coach on it all the time, especially around this time of year, that a major obstacle for so many of us is people pleasing. As we know, the holidays are this unique pressure cooker. They are this perfect storm of thrown off routines, of sensory overload from bright lights, loud music, different scents, and intense social demands. It is a season that can be super fun and also test every single one of our executive functions to the absolute limit. And at the center of all of this is often this deep-seated urge to try and make everyone happy and to never be the source or reason for anyone else to feel disappointed or frustrated. Now, this drive to please, it's not just about being nice. For many of us, it's actually a coping mechanism that we've learned to rely on. We twist ourselves into these pretzels trying to get people to like us, to approve of us, to not reject us. And the holiday season, with its endless list of social events with people we don't see very often, all the unspoken family rules, it can seem like this intense marathon that none of us signed up for. Now, you might already be feeling this dread. Some of you may not. In fact, some of you may go, Paula, I love the holidays. I never deal with any of this. If that's the case, I do encourage you to keep listening anyway and listen to the episode through the lens of people pleasing generally, because many of us do navigate people pleasing. But for those of you who navigate it, especially during the holidays, again, you may already be feeling this dread. You may be noticing that exhaustion in advance, just looking at the calendar. You might be craving a different kind of holiday season, one where you actually get to enjoy it and where your own needs don't get buried under a mountain of everyone else's expectations. So if that's you, you're in the right place. Okay, so today we're going to learn how to recognize the common patterns of people pleasing and identify the 4 most common areas where it pops up. And then I'll leave you with some specific action steps at the end of the episode to help you gather data over the week ahead so that you're ready for next week's episode, episode 330. So next week, we're going to get into the how. We're going to lay out this holiday survival guide for people pleasing, filled with actionable strategies and scripts you can actually use and permissions you can give yourself, not just to survive, but maybe even enjoy the holiday season. Okay, let's talk about how we can start reclaiming our holidays if we've navigated people pleasing in the past. As I mentioned, before we can start building new approaches and sidestepping that people-pleasing behavior, we first want to understand what's actually going on with our current behaviors. Why is it so incredibly hard for so many of us to say no? Why does setting a boundary or making a request feel so uncomfortable? This isn't just in your head. You're not just making it up. In fact, there's a pretty strong link between people pleasing and those of us with ADHD. And I think this is built on a few core pillars of our general experience, especially those of us with a later diagnosis. So let's talk about what those experiences are. The first is a big contributor, which is rejection sensitivity, or it's sometimes known as rejection sensitive dysphoria. If you have ADHD, there is a good chance you have experienced this before, probably multiple times, even if you haven't been familiar with the actual name. So rejection sensitivity is this intense, overwhelming, often painful emotional response to rejection, to criticism, or to perceived rejection or criticism. And I really want to emphasize the word perceived here, because it doesn't have to be actual rejection from someone's mouth or deliberately being left off an invitation to a gathering or something. It could be a slight shift in someone's tone or facial expression. It could be a text that seems slightly off because it doesn't have quite as many exclamation points or emojis as you're used to seeing. Or it could be a broader fear, a fear that you're not living up to some unspoken expectation by someone you respect. Now, admittedly, for any brain, ADHD or not, these moments can sting. But for an ADHD brain, navigating rejection sensitivity can, I don't mean this to sound dramatic, I mean it for real. It can feel like this soul-crushing blow, okay? And then we add holidays into the mix. This entire season can be rife with potential rejection. Maybe you're worried about disappointing your family because you can't make it to their annual dinner party. Maybe you want to say no to a friend's New Year's invitation, but you're worried they're going to stop inviting you to do things if you do. For a lot of us with ADHD, we have this deep belief that we need to, quote unquote, make up for our perceived shortcomings, for being forgetful or unorganized or running late or whatever it is. We think we need to make up for that. And we try and do this by saying yes to everything and trying to be as helpful as possible. Essentially, many of us think that if we're super helpful and accommodating, and if we're doing it all the time, we can kind of protect ourselves from that pain of rejection. In other words, people-pleasing becomes this shield from rejection. We say yes to the extra baking or the overwhelming, overstimulating party, not because we actually want to do the thing or go to the thing, but because saying no feels unbearable. It's a survival strategy by a brain that experiences social rejection as a genuine threat. And we have evolved this way. Now, I think it's really critical to understand that this rejection sensitivity, it plays a big role. It's something that so many of us navigate very intensely. And what's more, even more importantly, you're not quote unquote weak because you do people please. Instead, you have developed this approach to try and protect yourself from what could be a very real source of pain. So it makes sense. So that's our first one, rejection sensitivity. Next up, in the reasons why we tend to slip into people pleasing as ADHD brains is impulsivity, which is a core symptom of our brains. Simply put, impulsivity is doing something in the moment without fully thinking through the impact on the other side. So traditionally, this might look like blurting things out, making quick decisions, or, you guessed it, a lightning fast automatic yes when you're asked to do something. Impulsivity for the win. Okay. So for example, maybe someone asks you to host Thanksgiving dinner. And in that split second, your impulsive brain goes, yes, I need to do that. I need to do that. Yes. Before the more rational planning brain can even boot up and remind you, but we also have this other thing going on, and we're also doing this other thing for our brother-in-law. And I don't know, we don't have time for that part of the brain to come online. The impulsive brain takes over. It's only later that the reality of scheduling sinks in, with the time we actually have, the shopping required, the cleaning and the cooking, the overwhelm, all of that comes in. In fact, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast in the past, but I have this memory that has stuck with me for years, a lesson, I guess, that's stuck with me for years. I remember I was in undergrad and my wind ensemble professor came up to me one day and asked me, hey, would you do me a favor? And I automatically said, yeah, sure, no problem. I didn't think twice about it. And he just looked at me for a good couple of seconds and he goes, hold on, don't agree to something before you even know what it is. It sounds so obvious, but I am telling you, this blew my mind at the time because I always agreed to things no matter what. In my world, saying yes is what you're supposed to do. You're just supposed to be helpful and easygoing and agreeable. You couldn't possibly say no unless you're already obligated to helping someone else. Gosh. But let's be real. This impulsive yes, saying yes automatically, this is a classic ADHD trap. And for so many of us, it's this verbal reflex that's driven by the desire to be seen as helpful and capable in the moment. And because of that pull, we end up agreeing to things without taking that moment to check our calendars or our energy levels, or if we even want to do it in the first place, because that matters too. We don't have that moment to pause because our brains are wired to act first and think later. And then during the holidays, the requests tend to come in even faster, both at work and at home. At work, it might be, hey, could you finish this up by the end of the year before everybody goes on break? It might be with family. Can you pick up my cousin from the airport? Can you help wrap presents for the charity drive? Our impulsivity makes it so easy to say yes to all of it. But as we know, it creates a schedule that is so jam-packed, it practically guarantees burnout. And again, I want to remind us all that this isn't some failure of willpower. This is our predisposition to impulsivity. And because of this, many of us are seeking that dopamine release of being helpful while simultaneously avoiding the discomfort of having to say no. So that long-term consequence or the impact of saying yes, it just doesn't register in real time. We're only focused on the immediate moment of getting out of the discomfort of saying no. All right, let's build on that, shall we? Because another key factor here is emotional regulation or emotional dysregulation. So like rejection sensitivity, emotional regulation or dysregulation, this is something that many of us with ADHD know all too well. Our emotions just feel bigger. We feel them more intensely. They can be much harder to navigate. They can come on more quickly. When we feel an emotion, whether it's joy or anger or frustration or guilt, it's often perceived at a much higher volume. It feels more intense in our body. And since we're talking about people pleasing, let's zoom in on the emotion of guilt specifically, shall we? Because that sounds fun. For a people pleaser with ADHD, I'm telling you, even the anticipation of feeling guilty or the fear of disappointing someone, it is a powerful motivator that makes us say yes. I can't even begin to tell you the number of times I have heard from my clients and noticed in myself that we have said yes to something, even though we know it would completely exhaust us or push us past our capacity or what have you. We said yes in order to avoid some anticipated wave of guilt that we think we'd feel if we say no. Now, I am pausing in real time here to stop myself from going down a rabbit hole on whether we inherently need to feel guilty if we say no, and how much control we actually do have over the experience of feeling guilty. I am pausing myself because this does not need to be a multi-hour episode, but I'm making a note because I think this would be a good thing for us to explore in a different episode. Suffice to say, big asterisk, and a reminder that we don't inherently have to feel guilty when we say no. It's not a given. If I say no, it doesn't equal feel guilty. Okay, there are plenty of people who can say no who don't feel guilty. So just let's remind that to our brain. Just because I say no doesn't inherently mean guilt. Okay? We'll come back to that in another episode. Nevertheless, this doesn't eliminate or change the fact that many of us have been conditioned to feel guilty when we say no. Okay, so I don't want to take that away. Many of us do feel guilty. I'm saying we don't have to. So what we tend to do in order to sidestep the guilt is we do the thing that brings immediate relief. We say yes. So essentially what we do when we notice that guilt come on strong, when we feel dysregulated, we sacrifice our future well-being for emotional peace in the moment. And while we might occasionally be happy with our reasons for saying yes, there are many other times where if we would have had just a moment of time to think through what we're telling ourselves and what we're agreeing to and sitting with that feeling of guilt and seeing if it's really necessary to feel guilty, we probably wouldn't agree so readily. And also, if you're looking for some support around emotional regulation and navigating all these big emotions, whether it's guilt or anything else, I highly recommend checking out my course. It's called Overwhelm to Action, and it is a step-by-step guide to help you discover the unique ways that overwhelm shows up for you in your life. And it is filled with both the science behind why we navigate these big emotions and also how we can recognize them before they take over. And then, of course, we have actionable strategies to help you regulate your nervous system, move through the big emotions in a supportive way, and then take intentional action on the other side. So if you want to learn more about this course and how to navigate these big emotions and whether it's a great fit for you right now, you can tap through the link in the show notes or go to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/overwhelm and learn more. You can join us there today. Okay, so we've talked about rejection sensitivity. We've explored the obstacle of impulsivity and the automatic yes. And we've also talked about obstacles around emotional regulation. Now, let's touch on two final core areas which tend to build on one another, which are masking and self-worth. And as an aside, I've done deep dives into all of these different topics we're exploring today. So if you want to explore any of them further on your own, do check the show notes. There are at least 4 or 5 different episodes that I will link up there where we examine these individual topics in much greater detail. So if you want to dive into masking or emotional regulation or whatever, I have individual episodes on those topics as well. But when it comes to masking and self-worth specifically in regard to people-pleasing, so many of us, especially those of us with a later diagnosis of ADHD, we learned from a very young age to mask our symptoms, to just fit in. We learned to work twice as hard, to seem completely organized, to be on time at the expense of extreme anxiety, to appear, quote unquote, normal. And this can often lead to this really deep, nagging feeling of being an imposter. It's like this general sense that if people knew the quote unquote real us, the messy version, the chaotic version, they wouldn't like us, they wouldn't approve. And so people pleasing becomes a huge part of this mask. We become overly accommodating, always ready to jump in and help because we've come to believe that our helpfulness is what makes us valuable to the group. And please don't hear what I'm not saying, okay? Of course, being helpful is valuable. I don't want to downplay that, all right? What I'm saying here is it's the energy from which we're coming at being helpful. If we are being helpful and doing it from a place of fear or scarcity because we are afraid that we won't be accepted if we're not helpful, that's when I think it's incredibly important to pause and check in with ourselves. So I'm not saying that being helpful is bad. I am saying that if the reason you're being helpful is you're afraid of being rejected or afraid of disappointing someone, that's when I think it's important to pause and really evaluate what's happening first. Can you feel that difference? All right. Now, I'm going to offer a sort of generalization here next. And I want to acknowledge that this is not a truth across the board because I've worked with many men who navigate this need to mask and people please in hopes of approval as well. That being said, I do believe this tendency is especially pronounced, this people-pleasing tendency, with women who have ADHD. Because of societal expectations and the fact that ADHD symptoms in women can be more internal, they often get overlooked or misdiagnosed for years. So many of us grew up hearing that we're super spacey or too sensitive or too emotional or too intense. And so we spend this lifetime trying to compensate by being as low maintenance and easygoing as humanly possible. That fear of being seen as quote unquote difficult is enormous for so many women. And a lot of us have become chronic people pleasers, often at an incredible cost to our own health. And let's be real, the holidays tend to just turn up the volume on this experience of masking and imposter syndrome. We feel like we have to put on the perfect show, be the perfect host, the perfect guest, the perfect gift giver, whatever it is, all to maintain that mask and secure our place of approval, especially among the people that we see only on the holidays. So, as you can see, this isn't just some simple habit for us to break. No more people pleasing. Okay, great. No, of course, that's not the case. This is a really complex web of survival skills, frankly, that you have likely learned and refined over a lifetime. And what's more, many of these behaviors have likely been super useful and helpful to you over the years. But now that you know you have ADHD and you're developing skills and supports to work with your brain, we might not need to rely on them quite so heavily. Because now that we're understanding the machine, we can start learning how to dismantle it. In fact, if you're watching this on YouTube, or I think Spotify, you can also leave comments. If you are, I would love it if you would drop a comment below and let me know what is one thing or one area where you find yourself automatically saying yes most often, whether it's during the holidays or not. I think sharing our experiences in the comments, it'll help us all realize we're not alone in this struggle. We are all navigating these tendencies to people please. So if you're willing, pop over to YouTube. I'm just at I'm Busy Being Awesome. Or if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave a comment there as well. Okay. We've just gone through a lot about the why around people pleasing. And it's my hope that not only is this validating and helps you understand why you feel such pressure to please, often at the expense of your own well-being, but also that it gives you some concrete areas to reflect on and explore over the week ahead. So I invite you to stay curious and essentially become a detective of your own behaviors for the next week or so. You see, we can't shift patterns until we can see those patterns clearly. So over the coming week, I invite you to conduct what I'm thinking of as a people-pleasing inventory. So your main job is to simply notice. That's it. There is no judgment allowed. We don't need to, quote unquote, fix anything. We are simply building awareness as you go through your week. And as you do that, here are a few questions that you can explore whenever you notice that urge to say yes immediately pop in. So the first question, who am I with? Do I tend to notice this urge to people please more often with coworkers, with family, with friends, with your partner, with your kids? Notice if there are specific people who tend to trigger this people-pleasing response more often. The second question, what is the situation? So do you notice yourself people-pleasing more often in terms of social plans, in terms of taking on extra work? Is it around loaning money or offering more of your time? I invite you to identify the types of requests and situations that you often find the hardest to turn down. And then, number 3, how do I feel right before I say yes? So this question has you checking in with your body. What is going on there? Do you feel anxious or guilty? Do you feel pressure? Do you feel panic? Does your heart rate speed up? Do you feel a knot in your stomach? Get to know the physical sensations as well, because this is a powerful clue. It's something that can indicate to us later on, which we'll talk about next week. So throughout this week, I invite you to keep a note wherever it's easy for you. Maybe you keep a notebook on your desk. Maybe you use the Notes app in your phone, whatever works for you. Just jot down a quick line whenever you notice that tendency to people please sneak in. Maybe you write something like, I felt pressure to take on extra projects for my boss. I felt really anxious. Or I agreed to go to a party on Saturday with my friend. I felt guilty for wanting to say no. I didn't want her to be upset. This inventory is ultimately going to provide you with a lot of powerful data. And it's going to help you start illuminating your particular people-pleasing patterns. Ooh, that's alliterative. Your particular people-pleasing patterns, so that when we dive into specific strategies next week, you'll know exactly where to apply these strategies. Because as I often say, awareness is the first and most critical step toward living a more intentional life and spending your time in ways that truly align with what matters most to you. Because once we have that awareness, that's when we can build in the strategies and the supports to help you make that happen. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you are ready to take these concepts and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that works best for you, I invite you to check out today's show notes, where you can learn more about how we can work together, both in my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome, and in one-on-one coaching. Also, if you're ready to discover the unique way that Overwhelm presents for your brain, the obstacles those patterns create, and powerful steps to help you shift from overwhelm to action today, I invite you to take my free quiz and discover your unique overwhelm type. You can tap through the link in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/quiz. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.